Good afternoon and welcome back to ARTtech seminar. Now our next speaker is Arto Koistinen, who is going to present his talk about procedural generation. Arto, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Arto. I'm from a company called Random Potion. It was established last 2017 in January, and we've been working on a game called Scoundrel ever since. And a bit about myself. So, what am I doing here? Well, I started in the game industry in 2007 as a game designer in a company called Universama. We did mobile games before the smartphones, so really limited Java mobiles. We did Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Pixar movies and stuff like that. Just pretty cool, but nobody ever played the games because nobody played games with phones back then. I founded my first company, Dice War Games, in 2009. I was the CEO, game designer, programmer, writer, almost everything except art and music, but that's how you do it in the small indie companies. We were only 2 people back then. And we did a game called Rimelands that I'm going to be talking a bit later, and Trouserheart and a couple of others. Then I joined this another Tampere company called Q Games, where I was doing a lot of stuff, again, more role-playing games, and a collectible card game called Cabals, and a lot of different things. Until in January 2017, I decided to go indie again, and founded a new company with friends called Random Potion, where I'm a creative director, meaning I do almost everything except the business stuff anymore. So that's my background. And in this presentation is basically divided into 3 parts. There's a past. I'm going to be talking a bit about past games I've done and how they relate to the subject of procedural generation. Then the present, which is basically the project Scoundrel and the situation or how the game is right now. And then there's a future or plans for the future, how we are going to be bringing it, enhancing the generation algorithms, doing some new stuff and polishing the game in various ways. And here's a really redundant slide, because you already know I'm going to be talking about the past next. So, Rimelands was an iOS RPG released in 2010. Not for any other platforms, and unfortunately it's not available anymore. That's basically a turn-based RPG with a dice rolling mechanic. You can actually see in the screen, maybe there's some dice, you can actually see the dice on the screen, which was, I wanted to bring some transparency to the mechanics, and it was really heavily inspired by Hero Quest, the board game. I was actually, in the early stages of the project, I was playing the Hero Quest on an Amiga emulator, and was like, hey, this is pretty cool, but if you just streamline it a bit, maybe you can make it a bit better, and it actually worked out pretty well. About half of the levels were actually randomly generated, and I don't think most of the players ever realized that, because it wasn't a roguelike. It had a plot, story you played through from beginning to end. So most people just played it once, and because the general levels you couldn't really tell much difference from the normal ones, except they were a bit more boring. It used the deck-based generation method. Basically, you have this deck of rooms. Like you can imagine a deck of cards, or in some board games, you have these deck pieces that you make levels out of. So you have a deck, then you have a room which has 1 to 4 doors. Then you randomly pick another door. Then you find a room that fits there, and you do that until you have reached an ending. Like, okay, I want to make a level that's 10 rooms. Then you have this kind of critical path you have to take in the ending, and after that, you just take all the open doors and you place new rooms there. So then you have dungeon, and because you always generate the critical path first, then you are certain that the level is always completable. It's pretty simple to do back then, and it's with the deck-based method. Instead of doing something more granular, all the deck cards are one room size. It's easier for graphic artists to actually do something good-looking, because everything doesn't have to be, all the contents within the rooms are pre-made. It's visually quite consistent, and the levels, as I said, it's pretty hard to tell apart the pre-made levels from the generated ones. but it also has a really little variation. Basically, they are just mazes with some monsters and stuff, treasures thrown in. And next, in 2013, I did a game called Trouserheart that was released for iOS, Windows Phone, and Android in 2013, and it was actually published by a Tampere company called 10 Tons. It was originally a bit of a roguelite. It had this kind of a permadeath mechanic, but it was later we decided to make it more casual and less punishing, and a really simple procedural generation. The levels are generated, but they are so simple that you basically just place a few blocks and that's it. But it has more emphasis on generating the content, so you have different kinds of quests or puzzles you can have inside a level, and they are generated and mixed. So each level has a bit of a different kind of content. It also had quite limited variation because we wanted to make sure that all the elements work together really well, so they just didn't have time to create that much variation for the game. But that was basically my first try at actual content generation. And then there's you have to draw a map, which is my personal project, never released. It's basically a text-based adventure game with procedurally generated levels. So you have these choose your own adventure type text-based games. I wanted to do a bit like that, but actually more like a roguelike. And it's my first real attempt at actually generating puzzles through code. And the puzzles in the game were pretty simple. So basically, you had a lock and you had a key. And you had to find the key to open the lock. But the first challenge was, of course, to make sure that you can always find the key in an area where, like, before the lock. So this game had these kind of square levels, where each square was divided into 4 parts, 4 sections, and you knew, and they were linear, so you had to go to section 3 through sections 1 and 2. So you would always know if you want to. I want to place a lock on the door that's leading to section 3. If the key is in section 1 or 2, you can always find it. And the same generation algorithm was actually used later in a multiplayer prototype that would ultimately become the project Scoundrel, which is what I'm going to be talking about next. So, Project Scoundrel is an RPG. You can see here it's isometric 3D online multiplayer RPG. When we started the project, I admitted we were maybe a bit too ambitious, but we are getting there, and after some streamlining and redesigning things, we are getting close to our goal, which is basically bringing a tabletop feel into a digital game. If there's anybody played tabletop role-playing games? Yeah, so you know how it feels like. You haven't really, even in multiplayer online games, you don't really have the same feeling like, hey, okay, should we go left, should we go right, what do we do? Let's talk about this and blah, blah, blah. That same feel I feel it's been missing from digital games, but I think with some clever design choices, we can actually make a digital game that feels more like a tabletop game. One of the things we're doing just to make things easier for everyone is we are using tabletop rules. The current build is using Dungeons and Dragons, the official SRD rules that are free to use for tabletop games, but nobody knows about digital games, so we're probably going to tweak them a bit. But yeah, we want people to be really the rules to be easy to understand and to learn. It's heavily inspired by Baldur's Gate, as you could probably see in the previous screenshot. And we have player-driven stories, so each player has their own story and there's no overarching storyline for the game. All the stories are about the players and what happens to them and how they interact with each other and the world. And for importantly, just collaborative gameplay. We have a lot of things that demand players to actually work together to solve puzzles, to overcome enemies. If you just go run alone, then you won't make it. And then there's the story generation, which is a new thing I'm going to be talking a bit about. It's not mostly implemented yet, but going to talk a bit about ideas that I have about that. So Scoundrel is basically divided into adventures. When you go to the game, you go to on an adventure with your friends. And an adventure is a bit like an old school Dungeons and Dragons adventure model. It's basically it tells you what's happening and what you have to do. But instead of like old school adventure modules, they had all the content. That's always the same. We are actually generating most of the content. But the adventure itself actually sets the stage for what's going to happen and tells you a bit what you can expect from the level. Like, but where is it? Is it an old abandoned dwarven mine? Is it an elven forest? Or what kind of place you can expect? What kind of enemies are you? Are they undead? Are they orcs? Who's the threat? What's happened? Who are you supposed to overcome to complete the adventure? And of course, puzzles. If there's an adventure that says, okay, there's these monsters that been eating cows in the countryside, so living in a cave, you can be pretty sure that there's not going to be that many puzzles, but if you're descending this old abandoned tomb of a death lord, then you can expect that there's probably going to be traps and puzzles. And the other important thing about the thing we've been talking the most about the game is the social mechanics. It's basically the player interaction, how it's different from other games. And one important thing we're doing is giving the each player moment in the spotlight. So most game masters know that it's important in a tabletop game to remember to take each player into account, give them a spotlight. And it's something we're doing via procedural generation. We are generating stuff that demands that a particular player only can do this. So puzzles where only a certain character class can actually complete them. They might be dwarven runes, so you have to get the dwarf to actually read the runes. And there's a lot of class differentiation. Different classes have really different roles. Some are more combat-oriented, some are more puzzle-oriented, and some are more like preparing before the battle, and some are more like going through more aggressive. And that gives each of the players their own role to play in the party. And there's a personal storyline, so each character has their own personal storyline that's unique to them. It consists of about 10 to 15 different quests that you have to complete to actually complete the storyline. And nobody else actually knows what your story is unless you tell them. They won't know, and currently the stories are pre-written, so we wrote in a bunch of different kind of quests that players choose from, but this is something that's probably going to change. We are going to actually procedurally generate all sort of quests, so they are always completely unique. And the quests can be completed in all the adventures. So if you want to find a cultist letter, say, you probably won't find it in an orc cave. You have to go somewhere where it actually makes sense that you would find something like a cultist letter. Or if you need to kill an orc, you probably won't find it in an abandoned tomb. You need to think a bit like which adventure you want to go to, and this is one of the things you also have to agree with your group. So like, okay, we just did your quest, so can we do mine next? And this is all to facilitate the player interaction within the levels. So puzzles requiring collaboration. You can see in the screenshot there's like these pedestals you have to bring statues on. This is one of the puzzles you could actually do alone, but it's a lot more efficient if everybody just takes one statue, brings it to them. There are plenty of different variations of this. So everybody has to play their roles before they can move on. There's also intertwining personal storylines. Currently, there are some quests that actually can, like two players might have the same goal. They both might want to have the same book, but they basically just, of course, they both can't have it, and they might have wildly different things. Maybe one player would want to learn that book, another one would want to say use that book to summon a demon. So there's actually. If they find a book, they have to decide who gets it, or in the worst part, they can backstab a bit. But And the other thing is ability combos. This is a pretty basic thing. So you have different classes have different abilities that work really well with each other. And difficulty is something been playing a lot with lately. So it seems that in our kind of game, usually I'm not a big fan of really difficult games, but in this instance, it's basically if the levels are too easy, people are not collaborating because you can just run it through alone. But difficulty is actually important so that you quite quickly learn that if you don't work with others, you're not gonna make it. It's too dangerous to go alone. So we have these elements, and then we need to actually generate the level. Here's a kind of conceptual picture of what the levels look like. They're also divided into 3 areas. Well, any number of areas, but it's the same principle that if you have a lock somewhere, you know that the key has to be in some previous area. And then you have some side paths and stuff like that. Puzzles, combat, end boss. And first you again start by generating a critical path from the beginning to the end, and then you can just generate side paths, and you will always know that players can complete it just by going through the critical path. It's using the similar deck method to Rimelands. It's basically this small room size blocks that you use to generate the levels. And some rooms can have each side they can have either a wall or a door or a different type of door, which is important so that you don't have to do same room many times just to change the number of the doors. You can just switch them to make it suit to multiple places in the level. So divided into areas. And the puzzles are currently each area ends with a puzzle, so you can't exit an area without solving the puzzle or finding the key. And areas can also have different kind of types. So you can have a level where there's this dwarven mine type, and then in the middle there's also these natural cave formations, which brings more variation to the level. We're basically starting the level always by generating a starting room. You can see 2 of the starting rooms in there. And after the rooms have been generated, we are generating furniture to the level. So we can use the same rooms to have widely different effects. They can be forges, they can be kitchens, they can be storage rooms. And again, we don't have to redo the whole room for it, and we just change the type of furniture that can appear in the rooms. Each room has this market spots for different kind of furnitures and props that can actually exist in the room. And then the mood setting, which is used to create a bit more variation within the same level set or same set of environment. So there's for example, there's the generic environment. You can see the cooking oven. There's this is a place where somebody could still live. And then we have a variation of the same room that's called Goblinoid, or Goblin at the moment. So this is the same place after goblins and orcs have lived in here for a couple of decades. Everything is a bit darker, everything is in a bit worse shape, it's broken. But still, it's using mostly the same elements in a different way. And then there's the third type we have, this called Haunted. Again, same elements, a different kind of lightning, and now you have this haunted, ghost-invested, undead place with mostly the same props and with some spider webs and stuff like that. So when we have the level, we generate what's called encounters. Encounters are basically the actual contents of the level. They're the meat, they're what happens inside. Now that we have a layout, we are deciding what actually happens inside. We have different type of encounters. So there's puzzles. You can have these statues you have to push in the right order. Maybe you have to find a secret door somewhere. Maybe there are some NPCs, enemies. Enemies are, they're the combat encounters. And encounters can also happen in multiple rooms, so you can actually have one enemy in one room and a puzzle in another room within the same encounter. So if you have this, say, lever, You press the lever and suddenly an enemy appears for the next room. And of course there are different kind of traps as expected, and different kind of NPCs. When we generate the encounters, we start by actually finding a suitable location. So now we know the layout of the level, we have to know, and all the encounters tell the level generator, like, I need to have 2 rooms, if they need to be connected to each other, how many doors do they have to be, like, if you have this area, this locked door and a key, you want probably the locked door to be in a room where there's no other doors, so you can just go through the other door. You have to actually find the key, so you have to tell the level generator what to the encounter expects of the level. And we have fun, and then we basically just filter down a list of encounters that can actually exist in the level and start choosing them. Oh. And then there are some special content rooms that are usually related to players' personal storylines. And story rooms that are related to the actual story content of the adventure. And we are using player data as a starting point. So when we generate encounters, we are asking the system which kind of players, what can the players do? So we will never generate something that the players couldn't solve. And we are also facilitating the actual spotlight, sharing the spotlight. So we know that we are generating puzzles that only some players can solve, so they have something to do in the level. Which is related to special abilities, or character traits, like only a mage can open a magical lock. So this is basically how the system in Project Scoundrel currently works. But it has a number of problems in it still. One big problem is that we can't really force encounters. It's all dependent on the actual layout of the level. So if we don't have suitable rooms for one encounter, then it can't exist within the level. Or sometimes certain rooms always have to have a certain encounter. And that's a bit of a problem because we have some, say if we have this adventure where you have to find this magical book that's been raising the dead in the library, we can actually, at the moment, we can't be sure that book can be in where it's supposed to be. We can be sure that the book is in there, but we wanted to have this certain kind of puzzle which won't always be in the level. And that's a problem because that always limits what we can actually do with the adventures on what kind of variation we can have. And currently we have 2 different puzzle generators. One is used to generate the actual puzzles that are like between the areas, and the rest are the encounters that are not usually optional puzzles. The levels are still quite linear. You have to always have the one critical path you have to follow from beginning to end, even if you don't, of course, as a player, always know which rooms are in it. And then are some puzzle blockers. It is still possible to have an uncompleted level by having a key to one puzzle in a room that's locked by another puzzle, and the key to the other puzzle in an area where you can access it. So it's still possible to actually generate a blocker, and it needs a bit more than that. And the level end areas are always they always have the same layout. So when they're generating the level, if you can just fit the level in the area, you just have to reset the generation, regenerate it, and that's, well, usually that doesn't happen. That's still a bit annoying and a bit too hacky to my taste. And sometimes, again, because the layouts, because the content is so heavily dependent on layout, we get stuff like empty levels because you just don't get that many encounters that would actually suit the level, and they feel empty and boring. And then there's the headless chickens problem. That's something we've been playtesting the game, and we noticed that especially like for the first 1 or 2 games, people just run around like headless chickens. They don't collaborate, they don't do things together. They're so used to the usual playing style of just everybody going where they want to, that it's been a bit problem to actually make it clear to everybody, no, it's not a good idea to split the party. You don't want to run around everybody. You just want to keep together. You want to collaborate. So, what's coming up for Scoundrel and our level generation? There are some really simple answers. These are things that basically we know how to do, we just haven't had time to do yet. One thing is make all the puzzles into encounters, then we don't have two different kind of systems. That's basically a kind of a code architecture thing more than anything. We want to add loops and multiple area exit points. At the moment you have this bottleneck in the end of each area where you have to solve the puzzle to continue, but that's also a bit too limiting. We noticed that people actually want to have more, like it feels better if you have more choice. You can like decide, do I go to there, that's a battle, or do I go there, there's a puzzle, and I can choose like which one to do. Especially since we want our battles to be something you could normally avoid. We don't want to make a hack and slash game. We want players to actually think about things and not decide whether or not they want to risk combat. More content strictly, more contents with little restrictions on placement. So one of the problems is empty levels. We just can't find suitable rooms, but we could generate more kind of generic stuff that can be in any room, any kind of room, anywhere. That's quite a simple solution for that. But again, the problem with that is that it's this single room, simple encounters tend to get a bit boring in the long run. Okay, and for the at least to get better communication options, we are doing stuff like probably like probes. You can like place a thing on a map like, hey, I'm here, come here, or help me solve this puzzle here. Or you can also emote a bit. So get emotes like, hey, this way. So you can use your character to actually interact with the other characters a bit more. And the beacons. And also map markers. We actually just one of the versions we've been using to test didn't even have an in-game map, so this is something that we want to do. So yeah, to actually show like you can put a marker on the maps and hey, come here, and they automatically have stuff like you have a room that looks like a library and then it says like abandoned library, or you have a stinky kitchen or whatnot. So the map actually marks what kind of rooms they are. So you can say, hey, I'm just in the stinky kitchen next to the abandoned library. And again, it's easier to have the players pinpointed on a map, but it's more fun if you can actually tell others where you are. And this is now. And then we are taking things a bit further. This is content-based generation is the next thing we're actually currently working on. So basically this means that we are going to generate the actual contents of the levels before we generate the layout. And we are generating the layout based on what kind of encounters they have to be. So we can force the system to actually include all the adventure critical encounters, and we can force it to be more interesting, like one can force it to have more puzzles or more combat, and then actually generate the layout after we've done the content. And what we're basically doing is we're drawing this kind of mind map and grid from the encounters, like this encounter, and then we're generating the layout between them. So going from abstract model to a more concrete one, instead of going the other way around like we're doing now. And we're going to add more player interaction, like choices between the levels. This is something, originally this didn't feel right, but it's actually something we're thinking now actually doing, is having player choices like maybe dialogue options or something simple, so you can actually during the adventure, you can affect how the adventure will go. You can, if there's an NPC, you can decide on whether to save the NPC or not, or do something else. So the choices that actually radically might affect the outcome of an adventure. And again, which gives the players something more to discuss about, like should we do this thing or should we do this thing? And we can do something. We can also do a bit later when we have a server is seeding players' actions into other players' storylines. So you could actually say you find a sword somewhere and you can see there's a backstory about the sword. And this sword has killed this dragon by this legendary hero who is actually another player character. Or otherwise you can find a lot of text, or you can find stuff in the levels that are somehow have been affected by other players. So say a player loses an important magical artifact somewhere, you can actually find it in another level. And to make things work, and now we're moving towards the actual story generation. So what we're doing is I'm calling hacking the brain using apophenia, which is basically the tendency to perceive connections between unrelated things. And that's something people do all the time. And that's something we can actually use to our advantage, because we don't have to have a really sophisticated storyteller algorithm. We can just have some story with something that feels like looks like a story, and players will actually, when they read it, even if it's actually unconnected things, they are starting to see a pattern if we are using similar elements inside the story. And that we can really use to have a simpler generation that still feels like there's an actual storyline behind it. And common threads tie random events together. If you have two common events, both connected by the same character, same NPC, they already feel like, okay, they have some kind of connection, even if they're actually both random. So we're moving towards something that we're calling the story engine. That's based on entities. So you have this database of different kind of entities. They can be enemies like monsters, they can be kings, they can be legendary heroes, they can be artifacts. All sorts of entities that are fed into the system, they have different types of tags. And then that are then used to actually generate the contents of the story. Even the adventures should in the future be actually generated by the engine. So you have these small story beats, like a threat has stolen an artifact, and then you just take from the entity database, okay, we have this artifact and we have this threat. And then you can use them to actually generate, okay, this threat is this guy called Alucard, so he's a vampire. Let's just say, we know he's a vampire, so we know he has a tag undead. So what's been stolen? It's probably something that also has a tag undead. So this Necronomicon has been stolen by Alucard, and you have to get it back. And then we are starting using this to generate actually all the story content. So adventures, personal storyline, even descriptions and books that are found inside the levels. This is actually been heavily inspired by a talk on Caves of Cud. I don't remember, CUD was the name, but I don't remember the guy's name, but that's actually in YouTube if you want to check it out. It's really good about how they're using this kind of system to generate backstories for roguelike. And we can also use player influence in the long run, so we can actually remember, basically we can remember anything, the player stuff, and we can start affecting NPCs and enemy behavior via this system. And I think it would be nice to have stuff like if you've been killing 100 orcs and then you test this orc encounter, everybody's, oh my god, it's that guy, he killed my grandma, and they run away from you because they remember what you've done before. And yeah, I was quite quick, so that was it. You can find more information at Twitter, Facebook, website, or email me or Kirsi, our CEO, if you have any questions or want to contact us for some reason. And yeah, any questions?
Questions, comments from the audience?
Hi, thanks for the speak. It was good. I was thinking about the classes in the game.
Yeah.
So, what sort of approach do you have for it? Are you creating new classes or combining different sort of skill sets?
We have currently 4 classes that are pretty heavily based on basic role-playing and archetypes like rogue, fighter, and mage, and kind of a healer character. But they are a bit different. They're more. The healer character is more kind of a ranger healer and stuff like that. So yeah, they're basically pretty basic archetypes, but at the moment we don't have any like possibility to do class combinations. But that's something we are probably going to look into the future, and also have more variation within the classes themselves.
I do have more. So, what about if you start a quest with a group of friends? For say, what's the length of the quest from the start to the end?
I'd say it's usually been say 10 to 20 minutes. There are different quests have different lengths, so especially the later ones are a bit longer. So you could probably run like 30 minutes in the longest one, especially if you're careful and doing things slowly. But you can also run a shorter level in like 5 minutes if you know what you're doing. But mostly I'd say it's between 10 and 30 minutes.
So what about the platform?
It's going to PC.
Only PC?
At first PC, then we'll see. It depends on a lot of things, so I can't really promise any other platforms at this point, but probably some others too.
So when you complete the quest line, will it affect the world in the game, or does it have like a more bigger purpose in the game?
Currently, no. If it's just your personal storyline is over, we haven't really decided yet what happens to your character when you finish your personal storyline. Do you start another one, or do you just retire, or do you have some more generics, like you join a guild or something? It depends. We are still thinking about that. But no, at the moment, there's no big things that would affect the world when you finish storylines. But of course, in the future, that might also be possible. Like you could just mention that, okay, you finally killed the evil demon who try to possess your mother or something like that, and then you actually can hear the story in somewhere else, like find a book that tells your character story somewhere.
And also, when you start a quest and you're in the middle of it and you maybe get a clue to some other quest or something, like maybe you get a clue for another quest. Can you abandon or pause the quest and come back to it later?
No, you have to play the adventure. You have to play in one session. So it's basically if you leave, you're going to fail the adventure. So there's no saving or anything between inside an adventure. Because they are short enough, you just have to play it in one session. But of course, your back personal storyline you can finish in multiple sessions.
You have more, yeah, but let's see. Any more questions or comments? He has more, so just... We have time for one more question, so come on, hit it.
Let's see. Yeah. So will there be voice acting, storytellers, or such?
It depends. I hope that at some point, yes, but currently we're not planning any.
So no narration or?
Not at the moment, but that's something that's going to depend on a lot of production stuff more than on design.
Okay, thank you.
If we have no more questions or comments, Antti, thank you so much.
Thank you.